Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and the reason I'm coming to you today on this lovely Saturday afternoon weekend is my buddy Eric Herrmann over at Steelers Grind had found some breaking news over on Twitter that one of the fans at the Steelers men's fantasy camp that's going on this weekend had a chance to interact with the Steelers secondary and defensive backs coach Carnell Lake. As you may remember, Lake has been a coach for the Steelers for quite some time now, and also a very good safety in his own heyday. And I guess what happened during this men's fantasy camp is a familiar name surfaced once again. And me and Eric were talking about Brandon Bokyin just on last Tuesday's podcast that was released. Eric, of course, if you remember, my first guest ever on the Steel City Underground podcast here, and also a regular contributor over at steelcityunderground.com, where we were just talking about our picks for the offense and the defense. And we're always going back and forth on this Brandon Bokyin saga. And if you remember, just several weeks ago, I ran a show here where I was talking about how Boykin got released from the Carolina Panthers, and that NFL coaches and teams had to know something. People within these organizations had to know something that us and the general public did not know. And that information became public today via Twitter user at CraigScott31, who's quoting Carnell Lake. Now, mind you, this is secondhand information coming out of this fantasy camp from someone in attendance. So take it for a grain of salt, but this may be the answer, or at least the clue, as to why there have been so many problems with Brandon Bokyin, because apparently this has been kept a secret, not just from the general public, but it was kept a secret from the Pittsburgh Steelers when the Philadelphia Eagles traded Brandon Bokyin after the Steelers got into some trouble when second-round draft pick from last year, Senquez Golson, was placed on the injured reserve list for the entire year. They knew he wasn't going to be there, and they needed a slot cornerback. So the Steelers trade a conditional draft pick, ends up being a fifth-round draft choice after we see how many snaps and whatnot Brandon Bokyin played. And we saw that Brandon Bokyin didn't play a lot. And we couldn't figure it out. We couldn't figure out, any of us are sitting there, Boykin was supposed to be the savior. He's supposed to be the guy that comes in and helps this secondary that ended up being 30th in passing defense, pass yards given up last season. And he barely played, and it didn't make sense to anyone because he was widely regarded as one of the top nickel corners in the NFL when playing for the Eagles. So he comes to Pittsburgh, and he pretty much rides the bench, and the only guesses that anyone had was maybe one, that the Steelers just didn't want to give up a higher round draft choice by playing Boykin more. And that could be forced by ownership. We've definitely seen ownerships in the NFL force certain coaching staffs to draft and play quarterbacks among other types of players. Not usually successful when ownership is dictating the pace. And we know the Steelers aren't like that. But it was still in the back of your mind that that could be a possibility. The only other possibility we were thinking is, what if you had like one of these situations like what happened, for those of you who follow the NBA, and Delonte West supposedly sleeping with LeBron James's mother? It's the only thing we could think of, is that maybe Brandon Bokyin got involved in a relationship. And this is totally just hyperbole. I'm not saying he did. We were just trying to, TMZ style, find out what was wrong. But now we have a clue. Because according to at CraigScott31, he quotes Carnell Lake as saying, "I can talk about him now that he isn't here. Philly cut him because he has a degenerative hip condition. One leg longer than the other." Well, we know Philly didn't cut him. Philly just, they parted ways by sending him to the Steelers, and they actually got something out of that. They got compensation out of that. So he continues in another tweet, "Our doctors didn't pick it up. He could hardly run. I felt bad for him." Wow, there you go. And now, the Brandon Bokyin saga, it's finally answered. When you don't have faith in the Pittsburgh Steelers front office and coaching staff, and you're just questioning some of the things, we don't have to question. We now know. We have validation, at least. It's not that I ever doubted what our coaching staff was doing. You could question it, you could criticize, but now we have validation as to why the Pittsburgh Steelers coaching staff didn't play Brandon Bokyin very much. We were talking about this just the other day. I have a very good piece coming out on the wide receiver depth chart. You're going to probably hear that on Monday or Tuesday this upcoming week. And we're talking about how Antonio Brown, whether he should punt return or not. And we have these new wide receivers that could return punts. DeMarcus Ayers and maybe Eli Rogers. Ayers, a 7th round draft choice. Eli Rogers was a college free agent who got injured last preseason. He is in camp this year. And we're talking about how Antonio Brown got rocked by Vontaze Burfict in the wild card playoff game, did not play in the divisional playoff game against the Denver Broncos, and how miserable it was to watch Marcus Wheaton attempting to return punts, and how we needed someone there. And then somebody made a very good point that we know Brandon Bokyin is a returner, and we couldn't understand why he wasn't out there. Well, apparently it has to do with this. Apparently he was struggling. It's a physical condition. It's sad to see in a young player that his career may be over, because we thought maybe it was backroom, again, the off-the-field locker room issues. I went on a huge rant about this just the other day when Vince Williams was talking about the gorilla, bringing up the gorilla again that I didn't want to talk about. And we thought maybe there had to be something. What was Brandon Bokyin doing that Mike Tomlin and the Steelers didn't want him? And then all of a sudden, Ron Rivera and the Carolina Panthers were willing to part with $80,000 in guaranteed money, which was pretty much kind of the minimum for a veteran that's vested like Brandon Bokyin. He got signed for not very much money. You thought he was a higher caliber player than this. Like I said, very highly thought of coming from the Philadelphia Eagles. And then you're thinking, just with the whole Chip Kelly thing that was going on there, that whole debacle, the hot garbage of just week after week, a different player having a problem with the head coach. And with Chip Kelly just shipping off LaShawn McCoy and some of the linemen and Deshaun Jackson and all that, you just thought maybe Brandon Bokyin was another one of those players unhappy about how things were being run there, not seeing eye to eye with the head coach. But you couldn't see that with Mike Tomlin. You couldn't see that maybe with Ron Rivera. And you're like, what is going on with this guy? And then he goes and he checks in with he has a visit with the Atlanta Falcons just shortly after being released by the Panthers, and they kind of say no too. So it appears now that this degenerative hip condition, one leg longer than the other, very difficult for Brandon Bokyin to move. More than likely, he can't pass a physical now. That's probably something that happened or the Atlanta Falcons picked up on. And now the secret is out. And unfortunately, more than likely, this player's NFL career has ended. My heart does go out to him because, once again, I was just as high on him contributing to this team last year. You never like to see something like this happen with someone that's had a very productive football career from college to the pros, and seeing something end early like this certainly is sad. So I don't mean to be the National Enquirer or the TMZ and really rag on Brandon Bokyin. My prayers, my heart and thoughts do go out to him, and I hope, Godspeed, I do hope that maybe this turns around in his favor. I think there will be a silver lining to this cloud. But once again, now the mystery has been solved. Thank you, Eric, for bringing that to my attention. You know, we love to, when we can, we'd like to break some of this news. And hopefully this isn't something that I'm going to end up eating my words and saying, oh, this is wrong. Because when people just jump out there and take someone else's word for it, that's not the kind of guy I like to be. I don't like to be very sensational. But I did want my listeners, in case you aren't visiting the Twitters and the Facebooks and all of this stuff on your busy weekend, and you're just kind of coasting in your car, or you're in the office for the weekend and you need a quick hit to listen to, then here you go. Now you know what happened with Brandon Bokyin. We have closed the chapter finally on that story with the Pittsburgh Steelers. A very odd one, with a player who forced or recovered one fumble last season, only had 16 tackles, five assisted, just in one pick, and just a very odd situation, despite dressing for 16 games, only starting in one of those. Once again, Brandon Bokyin, my hat's off to you. At least we know it wasn't some locker room situation or something else behind the scenes off the field. We have plenty of players that cause headaches. You see players like Greg Hardy. You've got guys that are using drugs and performance-enhancing drugs that they shouldn't be. I'm just glad that it's none of the above, because this guy is going to end up on his feet. He's a smart player. He has gotten this far. You just never know where we may see Brandon Bokyin end up again. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, I appreciate your time and checking in with the Steel City Underground podcast. Until next time, I have a very good episode coming up for you early next week. Stay tuned, be good, and I'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.